Greetings, fellow Obsidizens of the vast Obsidian community. Welcome to Obsidian Brooklyn Style. No, that ain't right. Welcome to another video in the Obsidian for Noobs video series. Today I have a tutorial video in which I will discuss working with tables in Obsidian. As I'm sure you know, a table is a grid-like structure with rows and columns, similar in appearance to spreadsheets, as in the Microsoft Excel spreadsheet you see here. Tables are one of the most useful features in any document creation software, and as such, most of these programs offer the ability to insert tables within their documents, as you see in this Microsoft Word example of a table inserted in a Word document. Thankfully, Obsidian also offers the ability to insert tables into its notes. In this video, I'm going to discuss how to create tables in Obsidian, how to navigate within a table, and how to perform a variety of table operations. There are two ways to create tables in Obsidian. One way is to use Markdown. The other is to use a Notes right-click menu. As you will quickly see and appreciate, using a Notes right-click menu is the preferred method for creating tables in Obsidian. This is how an Obsidian table appears in Markdown format. Obviously, it's a nightmare. It's awkward, it's messy. Forget about it. The better way by far is to use a Notes right-click menu, as follows. By the way, my YouTube video entitled Markdown Alternative discusses the Notes right-click menu in detail, covering all the options offered and how they work. When you right-click on a note, the Notes right-click menu appears. If you go to the Insert option and select Table, you create a table in your note. By default, Obsidian inserts a 2x2 table. That's 2 rows and 2 columns. One very fortunate feature of Obsidian tables is if you click in the table once it's been rendered, you do not see the markdown. As I'm sure you know, if you do that with other markdown situations, you do see the markdown appear. But in the case of tables, once the table is rendered, the markdown no longer shows up. I should mention before I go further that I changed the table color in this vault using a CSS snippet so that the tables would be more clearly visible. Let me show you what the table would look like without that. I'm going into Settings, clicking on Appearance, and I'm going to scroll down to the CSS snippets. And I'm going to turn off the snippet that colors the tables in my vault. Now, as you can see, or maybe you cannot see, this is how a table looks in an Obsidian note in its natural form. It's very faint, very difficult to see. So now you can see why I created the snippet to change the color. Let me go back and put that on. All right, much better. The location where a row and column meet in a table forms a box, and that box is called a cell. In Obsidian, table cells can hold numbers, text, links to internal files, links to websites, pictures, PDFs, and videos. The top row of a table is considered its header, because it is common practice to put column headings in the first row of a table. The cells in the header look the same as the other cells in the table, and they can hold the same types of content, but they are treated slightly differently in Obsidian from the other cells in the table, and I'll show you that shortly. I have a 5x3 table here, 5 rows and 3 columns, in which I've labeled the headers, header 1, header 2, and header 3, and then label the rest of the cells by their row and column position. I'm considering the second row, row 1 or R1, because the first row is devoted to the headers. And I'm going to use this table to demonstrate the various ways you can navigate through a table in Obsidian. The first way is using the Tab key. If I place the cursor in the R1C1 cell and press the Tab key, it moves to the next cell on the right, and it continues to do so. Once it reaches the end of a row, if I continue to press the Tab key, it drops down to the next row, and then again to the right, next row, right, next row, right. When it reaches the bottom of the table, if I press the Tab key again, it will create a new blank row. And I can continually add rows in that manner. Pressing the Shift and Tab keys together works in the opposite direction. Let me start at R2, C2. Holding Shift down, pressing Tab moves one box or one cell to the left. When I reach the beginning of the row, it'll move up to the row above, and then to the left again, up to the row above. Now when I reach the top of the table, if I hold the Shift key down and press the Tab key again, it will insert a new blank row above the table. As you see here, I have a new row now above the header row, and I can continually insert rows atop. Another way to navigate around tables is to use the arrow keys on your keyboard. I'll demonstrate that with this simple table. If I go in the top left cell and press the right arrow key, the cursor moves to the box on the right. If I press it again, it drops down to the next row, then to the right. However, when I reach the bottom of the table, if I press the arrow key now, it'll drop out of the table. I exit the table. Remember, with the tab key, if you reach the bottom of the table and continue to press the tab key, new rows are created in the table. That is not the case with the arrow key. The arrow key drops out of the table. That's the same for the left arrow key. And for the up and down arrow keys. If I use the Enter key to navigate around the table, I drop down a row. If I reach the bottom row of the table and press the Enter key, a new row is formed. So in this sense, the Enter key works like the Tab key. Finally, if I hold the Shift key down and press the Enter key, the cell expands in size. This allows me to put multiple lines of text within a single cell. Shift plus Enter expands the size of the cell, allowing you to place multiple lines of text within the cell. So for example, if I begin typing in this cell, you see that the cell expands to accommodate the text. If I were to press the Enter key, I drop down to the next line. However, going back into the cell with the text in it, if I hold the Shift key down and press the Enter key, it expands the cell, and I can type another line of text in that cell. To review the navigation methods within a table, pressing the Tab key moves one cell to the right of the selected cell. When it reaches the end of a row, it will drop down to the next row. When it reaches the bottom right cell of the table, it will add a new row to the bottom of the table. Holding Shift down and pressing the Tab key works in the reverse way. It moves one cell to the left of the selected cell. When it reaches the top of the table, it adds a new row above the table. Arrow keys cause you to move one cell in the direction indicated by the arrow. When it reaches the end of the table in any direction, it will leave the table. The Enter key drops down one row. When it reaches the end of the table, it will add a new row to the bottom of the table. Shift plus Enter expands the size of the cell, allowing you to place multiple lines of text within a single cell. Now let's talk about placing content within a table. I mentioned earlier that tables can hold numbers, text, links to internal files, links to websites, pictures, PDFs, and videos. You've seen text and numbers in cells. Now let me demonstrate the other possibilities. Let's begin with a picture file. In my Assets folder, I have a PNG image, which I'm going to drag into one of the cells of the table. And you can see the picture is embedded in that cell. I mentioned that we can place links to internal files in a table. The way you do that is the way you would create a link in a note. Begin with double left brackets. Obsidian gives you a list of all the files in your vault. Select one. And then place an exclamation mark in front of the link to embed the file. So you can drag the file into a cell, or you can create a link to the file and place an exclamation mark in front of the link to embed the file in the cell. Let's do a PDF now. Again, I'm going to my Assets folder, I'm selecting a PDF file, and I'm dragging it into the cell of the table. And you see it displayed here with Obsidian's PDF viewer. So you can actually scroll through that PDF document and read it in the cell. And you can also make use of the other features offered by the PDF viewer, zooming in and zooming out and so forth. The PDF is fully functional within the cell of the table. Similarly, for video files, I have an MP4 clip here, and I'm going to drag that into a cell of the table. And not only is the video in the cell, but you can play it in the cell as well. So to review, you can place within the cells of a table text, numbers, video files, image files, and PDF files, and also internal links and links to websites. Let's talk about deleting portions of tables. To delete a row in a table, you can click in a cell and drag until you highlight the row, and then press the delete key on the keyboard. Likewise with columns. Click in a cell, drag down, highlight the whole column, press the delete key. Another way you can delete a row, if you hover on the left side of the table, a drag handle appears. Let me zoom in so you can see it better. That drag handle is just 6 dots arranged in a rectangular pattern. If I left click on the drag handle, the row is highlighted, and if I press the delete key on my keyboard, the row is deleted. The same works for columns. If you hover above a column, a drag handle will appear above the column. If you click on it, the column will be highlighted, and if you press the delete key, the column is deleted. Let me undo the last few steps to get the table back. To delete an entire table, click in a corner cell of the table, drag diagonally until the entire table is highlighted, and press the delete key on the keyboard. Again, click in a corner cell of the table, drag diagonally until the entire table is highlighted, and press the delete key on the keyboard. To add additional columns to a table, hover over the right side of the table until you see the plus sign appear, and then click on it, and a new column is formed. Again, hover along the right side of the table, a plus sign appears, click on it, and you have a new column. To add new rows to a table, hover beneath the table. When the plus sign appears there, click, and you get a new row. Hover on the bottom, click the plus sign, new row. That's the easy way to add rows and columns to your tables. Let me delete these. Okay, so far we've covered adding rows and columns to tables, deleting rows and columns from tables, adding content to tables, and navigating within a table. Now I'd like to cover some table operations that are accessed by what I call the table's right-click menu. Now this is different from a note's right-click menu. When you right-click inside of a note, this is the menu that appears. And I said I have a separate video that covers all of these features of this menu in detail. Right-clicking in a table offers you a different menu. As a matter of fact, there are 2 different menus you get when you right-click in a table. The distinction is as follows. One of these menus is accessed by actually clicking in a cell of the table, any cell, and then right-clicking. And you get this large menu here. If, however, you do not click within the cell, but simply hover over a cell of the table and right-click, you get this abbreviated menu. The reason for this difference is because if you click inside of a cell, you get options that apply to cell contents. You can add a link to a cell. You can format the contents within a cell. You can bold the text, italicize it, and so forth. You can paste things in a cell. However, if I click on the table itself, I get options that only apply to an entire table. Moving around rows, moving around columns, and sorting. So you can think of one of these menus as being cell-specific. That's when you click in the cell and then right-click. Those are cell operations. And the other menu is table-specific. You hover over the table and right-click. And then you get commands or options that apply to the table as a whole. All right, let me demonstrate some of these very quickly. Let's start with the table commands. Even though you're not clicking inside the table for the table commands, which cell you hover over makes a difference. If I look at the row options, I have add row before, add row after, move row up, move row down, duplicate row, delete row. The row I'm hovering over is the row that's affected by these commands. So for example, if I hover over the A here, I'm in the 3rd row down, and I select delete row, that's the row that's deleted. Let me undo that. If again I hover over that 3rd row, the row with the A's in it, and this time I select duplicate row, that's the row that's duplicated. Where you hover over the table when you perform table operations matters and makes a difference. All right, let's look at some of the other options here. Under the row options, add row before. If I click on that, it will add a blank row above the row that I'm hovering over. As you can see here, I was hovering over the row with the A's in it. I clicked Add Row Before, and it adds a blank row above. If I hover over, let me click outside the table. If I hover over that A row again, and this time I select Add Row After, it will add a blank row beneath that row, as you see here. So Add Row Before adds a blank row above your current location, and Add Row After adds a blank row below your current location. Let me delete these blank rows. Move row up and move row down. Again, I'm over the row with the A's in it. If I select Move Row Up, what happens here is that the row that I'm hovering over, this is the row with the A's in it, will move up one position. And the row that was in that position will move down. In other words, Move Row Up causes a swapping of rows. The existing row moves up, and the row that was above it moves below it. So when I click on that, the row with the A's in it has moved up to the second row position. And the row that was there, as you can see, this is the table, by the way, in its original format, so you can make comparisons. The row that was in the second row position has now moved down to the third position. Let me undo that and repeat it. I'm hovering over the row with the A's in it. I right-click, and in the row group, I select Move Row Up. And that row has moved up to the second row position, and what was in that second row position has now moved down to the third row position. I'll undo again. Move row down works in a similar fashion. The row with the A's in it now will move down to the fourth row position, and the row that is there, 3D3, will move up. And you see that happened here. Right? The 4AA moved down one row, and the one that was in the fourth position, 3D3, has moved up. So again, move row up and move row down really entails swapping rows. Okay, that covers the row possibilities. Let's look at the column ones now. Add column before and add column after works similar to add row before and add row after, only now we're dealing in a column structure, so we're talking about left and right. Add column before adds a blank column to the left of the selected column. And add column after adds a blank column to the right of the selected column. Move column right and move column left behaves like move row up and move row down. The columns are swapped. So if I'm hovering over that middle column now, the one with the header 2 heading, if I select move column right, the header 2 column will move to the right, and it will be swapped with the header 3 column, which will move to the left, as you see here. Let me undo that. Align left, align center, and align right refers to the contents within the cell. If I pick align center, we should see the letters CADB move to the center of the cells. And you can see that does. I'll undo that with Control Z. Duplicate column is like duplicate row. It makes a copy of the column. And naturally, delete column deletes the column. All right, now we need to discuss sorting. I have two identical tables here with exactly the same entries in the cells. I'm going to perform a variety of sorts on the top table, and you can refer to the bottom table to recall what the original positioning was of the item so you can see how the sort was accomplished. I'm hovering over the header 1 column, I'm right-clicking, and I'm selecting Sort Column A to Z. If the cell entries are words or letters, then the sort will make them alphabetical. If they're numbers, as is the case here, it'll sort them in ascending numerical order. In this case, we should see 1, 2, 3, 4 be the result of this sort. And that's exactly what happens. This was the original format, and this is what it is after the sort. Let me undo that. I'll perform that same sort on the second column, which does have letters. They're in random order now. When I perform the sort, we should see A, B, C, D. Right-click, sort by column A to Z, and sure enough, A, B, C, D. Now notice something interesting and important. When you sort a column, the entries of that column are sorted in accordance with the sort you picked. In other words, in this case, alphabetically. All of the other rows moved with the sort. The entire table is affected by the sort. Only the column you selected is sorted in the way you want it to be sorted. But all of the associate parts from the other rows move along with it. This was the table in its original format. When I sorted column 2 alphabetically, I got A, B, C, D. But notice that in the original format, the row that had the A in the second column had a 4 in the first column and an A in the third column associated with it. And when that A moved up to the top, the 4 and the A moved with it. In other words, when you perform a sort on a table, the rows in their entirety are moved, not only the cells within that column. The entire rows are moved in accordance with the sort. Let me undo this sort and do it again. I'm going to go back to column 1, and I'm going to sort A to Z. I get the sort as I expect, in increasing numerical order, 1, 2, 3, 4. But notice that in the original format, the 4 was in this row, and it had the A's with it. It naturally moved down to the bottom to complete the sort, but the A's went with it. The entirety of the rows moved. So be aware of that. If you do a column sort in a table, the entire structure of your table changes in accordance with the sort. I'll undo again. The other sort option is in reverse order. Sort column Z to A. If I do the second column, if I perform this sort on the second column, I get a reverse alphabetical pattern, DCBA. I'll undo that. If I perform the reverse sort on the first column, I'll get the numbers from highest to lowest, 4, 3, 2, 1. So that's sorting your tables by columns. Oh, I want to mention one other thing that I forgot to say earlier. When I was discussing the drag handles in order to delete a row or column, I forgot to mention that you can also use the drag handles to move columns and rows. So if I hover over the top of the first column and allow the drag handle to appear, and then I left-click on it and hold it, I can move that column to the second position. You now see the header 1 column is in the second column position. And I can drag it back. I can even drag it to a different location in the table. Now header 1 is in the third location. I can do the same with rows. If I hover over the header row till the drag handle appears, grab a hold of it, and drag all the way down, I've moved that header row to the bottom of the table. So drag handles can be used to highlight a column or row to delete it, and they can be used to drag a column or row to a different location. So there you have it, working with tables in Obsidian. As you can see, Obsidian makes it easy to add tables to a node and to work with those tables as well. What creative ways can you think of to use tables in Obsidian? Okay, fellow Obsidicans, that's all I have for now. I'll see you in the next video. Happy note-taking.